Views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants. The hosts make no claim to be literary experts, and their opinions are exactly that, opinions. All creative works discussed or reviewed are the intellectual property of the creators of said stories and is being used under the fair use doctrine.
Please note that we tried using a new online service for recording with multiple remote co-hosts. Sadly, the quality was not great, and we apologize for that.
Today we are getting to interview Sebastian Nothwell, who we've just had the pleasure of reading his book, Oak King, Holly King. He's written lots of other books, but that's the only one we've read so far. And we are super excited because it is our first time having anybody else on the podcast other than us. So welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be the first.
So we've got like a list of questions and we'll just kind of go through them. But if there's anything else you want to talk about or anything else that anybody else thinks about or jumps in on, it's completely fine too. Loosey-goosey, all good.
Yeah, I love a good deviation.
I thought we would start with how you would define romanticism, since that's like our main focus, and whether or not you feel that your book, Oak King, Holly King, or any of your other books fall into that category.
I would define romanticism as a fantasy novel that fulfills all the prerequisites of a romance, in that the romance cannot be removed from the story without dissolving the plot, and it ends in a happy for now, if not a happily ever after. And I would say my historical fantasy books absolutely fall into this category. My historical books, not so much, just because there's no fantasy elements, so they don't really fulfill the fantasy half of the romanticism.
Makes sense.
Could you tell me more about happy for now? That's a new term for me. Like, I understand, like, I got the concept, but happy. What's a good example of happy for now?
Happy for now would be like if it's a romance between two assassins, and at the end of the book, like, they're still on the run from rival nations or whatever, but you know that they know they love each other and their love for each other is strong. And while like tomorrow isn't necessarily secured for each other, they still have each other, if that makes sense.
Like, okay, love
I
in
would
the
read
moment.
that.
Yeah. If that's the case, I have a book recommendation for you.
That sounds good. Yeah. So what got you into writing?
What got me into writing seriously and like actually finishing books and putting them out was my sister texted me out of the blue about 10 years ago and said, let's write romance novels and become rich and famous. And I was like, okay, sure.
Good plan. All right.
Finally, an external goal. So I wrote my first book, Mr. Warren's Profession. I wrote 10,000 words of it, and I was like, wow, this is the most I've ever written of any one thing before. So I was like, hey, sister, do you want to read this? And she was like, I only read finished books. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm finishing this. So I finished it, and I was like, all right, it's an ebook now. Do you want to read it now? And she was like, actually, I only read paperbacks. I'm like, okay, I'm learning paperback formatting today, I guess. So I made it a paperback, and then I handed her the physical book, and I was like, okay, now she'll finally read it. And I asked her how she thought of it, and she said, yeah, I couldn't really get into it. So
Wow.
Saboteur. Oh,
What a twist. Right up until then, I was like, oh, what a great way to motivate a writer.
I mean, she really did. I do owe my career to her, but yeah.
But the real question is, did she ever finish writing anything?
No.
Ah. So you will always have one up on her.
I guess, yeah.
No.
Indeed.
So who or what, other than your sister peer pressuring you, are some of your biggest influences in writing?
I'm influenced a lot by all of Victorian literature I read to research my first couple books. And then beyond that, I'd say my primary motivator is probably spite.
Ooh,
just because, like...
I love that.
Yeah.
Ooh, that is right up my alley. I do most of my stuff out of spite. Sometimes there's don't do out of spite. Like the dishes. You remember that from this morning?
I remember.
Yeah. Bedside table, cup forest.
The things you do for spite, though, are impressive as well.
Now, I can relate. I remember in one of the podcast episodes we listened with you, you were talking about how you were motivated a lot by trying to make oppressors uncomfortable.
Ah, yes. Comfort the oppressed and discomfort the oppressor, yeah.
Right.
Yes, I love that.
Not my words, but I do live by them.
I can make people uncomfortable. It's one of my favorite games. But is spite more hate or spite more like revenge or like a need to prove? Like, like I think at one point I didn't get hired with a specific company, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to show these guys. And then I ended up climbing the ranks with their sons, the CEO's son's enterprise. Remember that with Anthony?
I remember.
Yeah.
For me, the spite is more seeing a story that didn't go the way I expected, or being told that people like me have no place in certain stories and being like, okay, bet. We'll see how this goes for you.
I like that. Challenge accepted.
I'll show you kind of spite. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I do that a lot as well.
That brings up like a great place. So like I'm sure like you're writing queer romance, right? So there's got to be a time when mainstream market rivals are like there's this application of pressure to perform with your peers. I guess who are your peers and how do you approach that? Because Ashley, how do I want to say what I want to say?
I'm not sure yet, my love. I'm equally trying to dig it out of you. I'm not sure where you're going.
Like
are you talking about like the pressures of publications or
no, I like normalizing queer romance in a market that's littered with like what's the stereotype, soccer moms and like the ACOTAR thesis
Like
collection.
more heteronormative literature?
Yeah, what's heteronormative.
It is the cultural expectation that everyone will be straight.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So what do you do? Like, how do you fight for that space?
I feel like throughout history, queer people have kind of carved out our own space in society. And it's like that a lot in publishing. I will say, like, traditional publishing has only very recently come around to the idea that queer stories are worth telling, mostly because indie authors have proved that these stories are marketable and do have an audience that's hungry for them. But, like, only within the last 5 years you really see that coming out of traditional publishing. So in the indie author space, it's less like you're fighting against other authors and more that authors are all kind of working together to uplift each other.
Okay.
Because, like, we don't have a publisher, and also because we're not going through, like, agents and editors, like, we're not all competing for a very small pool. We're all working together to create a larger pool that fits all of us in it and allows us to connect with readers directly. Because, like, readers don't really have an upper limit for how many authors they'll read. Like, that's the idea that there's only a limited pie for everyone to get a slice of is not really true.
Right.
As far as books are concerned.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's legal to have more than one, right?
I've been told.
Well, I think e-publishing has helped change that mindset.
Oh, absolutely.
I think 15, 20 years ago, even, there were only a few publishers and, there was a limit to how much money they were going to invest in authors and how many books they were going to publish a year and stuff like that. So ebooks and self-publishing have really changed that dynamic, I think, and helped a lot of these voices get heard and get a space that wouldn't have 10 or 15 years ago.
Absolutely, yes. And it's funny because, like, you asked me who my peers were, and it feels like arrogant to name anyone specifically, but I will say that the author KJ Charles really kind of paved the way in terms of proving that gay male romance had a market, because she had worked in publishing, and in the early 2010s, she was approached by the publisher she was working for, because they're like, hey, we've heard that you write stuff, give us one of your novels and we'll see if we'll print it. And she gave them a manuscript, and they were like, oh, we don't, like, there's no market for gay stuff. And so she was like, oh, okay, to Amazon I go. And she kind of single-handedly proved that, yes, readers were actually extremely hungry for historical romantasy featuring gay characters.
Nice. And for clarity, when I say, like, rival, somebody who is not in opposition of, but helps advance, right? So not
okay, so this is like a sports anime kind of rival.
Yeah, with
okay.
So so if I was talking about market rivals, like I look at competition and rivalry differently. Competition is something that prevents you from getting from point A to point B, right? So competition between myself and this car drive. The end of this car drive is like a flat tire, blown engine, something like that, right? But a rival would just be somebody else sharing the highway with. You can be friends with people. Like I raced against Kelly a whole bunch.
I guess it's just difficult because, like, with the idea of a rivalry, the implication to me is that there can be only one winner. Whereas, like, seeing other indie authors do cool, new, and exciting stuff and achieve, like, milestones and goals is, like, inspiring for me. And I do think, like, oh, I want to do that. But the solution to that is to go to that author directly and say, like, hey, if you have a minute, can I ask you some questions on how you did that? And, like, 9 out of 10, they're like, oh, here's how I did that. And then I go do that. And then I share what I learned from my process with them. And then they get to improve their process with my results. And it just kind of, it's very much a back and forth collaborative effort.
A better, more inclusive community. Like a positive community for everybody.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Sharing is caring.
So when you write, would you say you write, when you make your choices and you write, are you writing for a general audience, or would you say you're thinking about writing for specifically someone who's into indie or someone who's into queer romance? Like, who do you picture your audience to be?
This is always such a tough question because, like, as an indie author, you're doing all your own marketing, and the nonstop advice is always like, create your ideal reader and market your book towards them. And I'm like, well, my ideal reader is just me, so I guess I'm writing for the hypothetical freaks like me. And to my great surprise, these people turned out to actually exist. So
it works.
I'm writing for a community of people who like the very weird specific choices I make with stories.
Nice. So what's your writing process like in your writing space? Like, how do you go about doing all that?
The writing space post-pandemic is just my house, unfortunately. I used to enjoy writing in the library and just kind of being in the wider community, but that's no longer a necessarily safe choice these days. So a lot of writing in the house. And then the process itself is what I call quilting, which is most story ideas occur to me as like just a few core, compelling, high emotion scenes between specific character archetypes. And then I build out from those to create a complete novel where I just write enough connective tissue between those intense scenes to make them make sense logically, ideally. And it's kind of like, you know, when you're quilting, you find a few really cool pieces of fabric and you're like, I would love to incorporate these into a larger framework. So you stitch everything together between them and then you finally have a quilt.
So do you have like a bunch of like scrap paper with like fragments of stories? Like maybe you got an idea, you're driving along, you're like, oh, this would be like a really cool magic carpet riding goat. Let me just write that down. And then like you're driving along, you're like, oh, you get this battle scene pops into your head, or then you're like this, like you have an interaction, and you get these small little snippets or glimpses of a story, and you put them down somewhere, whether you speak them out or write them down, and then you just store them. You're like, what can I do here? I want to go from point A to point B. I have these big blocks. I want to fill in the gaps here. What story do I have? Let me just go to my reference file. Is that kind of the process or part of the process?
That is the process, exactly, yes.
Oh.
My house is filled with scrap paper.
Just like a treasure trove of scrap paper.
Oh,
the worst is when I know I've written something down and I've remembered that I've written it down and I remember most of it, but I can't find the specific piece of paper I've written it on.
You don't name them? You don't name the papers? Like legit names, like Bob, Thomas, things like that? Like, so many questions.
You got to simmer down, one at a time.
One at a time. Wait, let me delete that first one. Because, like, do you have to keep all your papers where you can see them at all times?
The incredibly chaotic way I do it is I try to group the scrap paper by story. So like, okay, these all fit together with this story. I'll put them in this section of the notebook and I'll just kind of shove the pages in there and hope they don't fall out. That strategy has not always worked for me because of gravity, but
yeah, I can see that.
So it's a lot of going through old notebooks, finding all the scraps of paper and like flipping through different chunks of different stories until I find the correct scrap of paper that I was thinking of. And recently I had to rewrite the entire ending of a book because I couldn't find the scraps of paper that I had written originally. But it worked out.
For perspective, that was like when you lost the password to that spreadsheet.
I did lose a password to a spreadsheet. This past week I had to recreate all the spreadsheet embarrassed the out of me on that meeting. I was so mad. I was like, don't worry, I'll fix it. And then I had to go recreate the whole thing by EOD. I was like, ooh, so mad.
In my head, it was like a romantic partner who couldn't perform. Like that was his reaction. He was so embarrassed.
I was so
he He said it to the person. I'm so embarrassed right now. This has never happened before. I swear. The glare he's giving me right now. But that's exactly what it was. I'm bridging the gaps here.
I got it back on track. What I usually do is when I password protect worksheets, I typically hide the password in white.
From yourself?
So I hide them from myself super well. It's not like I have it's not like NASA core. I got to bring it down. Just give me this. I'm so sorry. You got me excited about spreadsheets.
And then
I started envisioning this Kanban board of like
cutting off Excel, Jonathan. Cutting off Excel.
Oh no, we're back on writing. So have you thought about the walls? Like, because you can tape stuff to walls.
Have you thought about the walls?
My old apartment, right now the apartment I live in has horsehair plaster walls, so like tacking stuff up has not gone well. But previous apartment, good old fashioned drywall. And there was a full wall that was just scraps of paper tacked to the wall.
Yes.
It was very like conspiracy board, a little concerning to the untrained eye. But I knew exactly where every story was on that wall. And then I had to pack them up and move. And I think that's where I lost the end to that other story.
Oh, we got to get you a writing wall.
So how did you come up with the idea for Oak King, Holly King? What little scrap of paper led to that?
I was doing my standard boredom wiki hopping, which is just going through Wikipedia articles, through like history and mythology, and just clicking those little blue links on everything that looks interesting and opening several hundred tabs at once. And one of those articles happened to be the one for the Horned God in Wicca, and it included the original myth of the Oak King and the Holly King, which is they have to kill each other to turn the seasons, and they're both aspects of the same god. And I was like, okay, this is great, but let me just swap some letters around. And what if, instead of killing each other, they were kissing each other? Is that anything? And so I basically came up with the end of the book before anything else. And I was like, okay, what kind of guys do I need to invent to make any of this make sense?
It worked. I mean, it absolutely worked. Yeah.
I'm so relieved to hear that. Because I was never sure it was going to work out.
So are any of your characters based on like people that you know or past relationships? Because we were talking about, oh my God, I just blanked on the name of the movie. Was it True Night? First Night?
Oh, wait.
Knight's Tale.
Knight's Tale?
Wow, I was completely wrong.
The most historically accurate film of all time, A Knight's Tale.
Sure.
Yeah, the one where Chaucer invented Queen.
Yeah, exactly. But where Chaucer's got that scene where he's like, I will eviscerate you in fiction. Like, I think about that when I think about authors. I'm like, it would be nice to authors if you don't come up in a book.
I will say, my sister does keep reappearing as an archetype.
Ooh.
There is kind of like a stock elder sister character who keeps showing up. And because my sister is a multifaceted human being who contains multitudes, she's always slightly different book to book. But yeah, there is always kind of like an older sister mentor character who's helping in a way that other people may or may not perceive as loving.
I gotcha. She's keeping the other characters honest along the journey. Like, hey, I only read paperback. This doesn't
exactly, yeah.
All right. I like it.
She keeps moving your cheese.
Yes.
Yeah. Is this like your favorite era to write in, or are there other eras that you enjoy?
The Victorian era it's interesting to me because Victoria reigned for such a long time, and then because history is not really easily divisible into very clearly delineated sections, like no one wakes up to one day and is like, right, Victoria's on the throne, we're changing our entire culture overnight, goodbye Regency forever. Like, stuff carries on through, and then stuff falls by the wayside, and so you get what they call the long 19th century, which is like a little bit of the end of the 18th century and a little bit of the beginning of the 20th century. And within that, you have a period of like great social and technological change, because like at the beginning of the century, it's not technically entirely pre-industrial, but functionally it is. You know, you don't have steam power, coal power everywhere. You don't have factories springing up everywhere. It's still a very like slow, laid back agrarian society. And then by the end of the 19th century, you've got a society that looks shockingly similar to our own today, in terms of just like the rapid technological advancement and the social upheaval. So if you like pick and choose from any point along that timeline, you can get a world that still feels familiar and will still have like touchstones for you, but will give you a whole new place to play in at the same time.
Nice.
That said, I did recently just go to 18th century Venice just for a lark for a book, and that was fun in that I had to learn a whole lot of new cultural stuff because Victorian mores and what have you did not necessarily apply there. But there was still enough Victoriana I could carry over. I think I will, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be like a Regency Victorian Edwardian basis for my fantasy books, just because, like, at this point, I know the Victorian era fairly well, so I don't have to do as much initial research if I want to set a story in something based there.
So are you like an amalgamation of these eras together?
I guess, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. I like it. Because that involves a ton of research. You got to be like vicious in Jeopardy, right? So like
he's committed.
Yeah, it is commitment. It's commitment. What's your research process like? Are you like smash it all in there? Like, you know, like put like it's 24/7, eat, breathe, sleep, this research while researching a period or
basically, yeah.
Okay. Oh.
It's a lot of, it used to be easier because Google didn't suck 10 years ago. So when I put Boolean search terms into Google, it would actually return relevant results, which was great because with the Victorian era, most everything they produced is in the public domain. So it's freely available on like Project Gutenberg or archive.org, or the magazine, The Engineer, which is still running, used to have the entire digitized archive of everything they'd been publishing since the early 19th century, which was absolutely invaluable as a resource. Now my research is more book-based.
Like tangible, like analog books?
Yeah, a lot more analog books, so it's a lot more reliant on like libraries and JSTOR and thrift books.
Oh, you're probably a great thrifter.
I wish you guys could see the marvel on his face right now. Like the ideas that are running through his brain like a hamster on a wheel. I'm scared.
I was thinking like I'm in this like flea market space.
I did spend a not inconsiderable amount of time working in antiques, yes.
You got a whole podcast, don't you, with antiques? I want to know about that.
Well, we have 20 hours to figure it out.
We're at 20. Do you have 20 hours of antique podcasts for me to listen to?
We have over 300 episodes.
You see that?
Sold.
So we can listen to that. Tick that box.
Kelly is a history major, and he very much liked all the history references in Oak King, Holly King. That was one of the things that came up in our review. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, fantastic. Finally, someone else who cares about the Peasants' Revolt.
Yes, I know, exactly. I was like, oh my God, we're talking about the Peasants' Revolt and how that may or may not have affected King Richard's reign.
Finally.
Yeah. Kelly was so excited about that. I was so excited when you mentioned Hieronymus Bosch. I was so excited I had to message you about it because I was like,
yes!
Oh my God, I can't talk to anybody else.
Love a Hieronymus Bosch.
Yes. What is something you would like to see more of in current storytelling, whether that's books, movies, TV, whatever?
At the risk of being very selfish, I would like to see more queer stories front and center. Like, I've learned to appreciate a queer side character or a queer villain because growing up, that's all I had. And until, like, the last 5 years, that was most of what I had. But I would like to see more queer characters front and center, more queer protagonists, more undeniably queer protagonists, not just, oh, there are some vibes here, maybe, they just don't say. And I would like more queer happily ever afters. I would like us to be at the front and center of the story, and I would like us to survive to the end of the story and beyond. That would be dope.
Yes, all the happy endings.
Yes.
What is something people often get wrong about you?
Would you believe the pronouns?
Really?
The pronouns, yeah. I kind of get it when people hear me speak before they know anything else about me, because I know how I sound, I am aware. But yeah, so I make an effort to put my pronouns in all of my social media bios and in my email signature, and there are people who still do not get it, and it's just like, well, I don't know how much more I can do on my end, bro. Like, right. At this point, at a certain point, it's on you.
Do you have a favorite Victorian word?
Lately, I've been really into refulgence, which I did have a chance to work into Oak King, Holly King.
What does that mean?
Refulgence, it's basically like a big spray of light, like a sunbeam, just like something that's so bright and awe-inspiring.
He's so impressed right now. I know you can't see his face. The look he just gave me was mildly orgasmic.
Beautiful
he
word.
was just like, sorry.
I'm gonna have to work that.
Refulgence. The author of the Victorian Penny Dreadful Varney the Vampire finds a way to work refulgence into almost every other chapter. It's honestly kind of impressive.
He is astounded.
I'm gonna put that.
I did slip it into O King Holly King, so
thank you for that. Thank you for that nugget.
Jonathan is eagerly awaiting the audiobook.
I read with my eyes and my heart. Wait, not my eyes. My
not
ears.
your eyes.
But thank you for reminding. Thank you for reminding me. I read with my ears.
Like many people, I hear with my eyes. But yeah, I am very excited about the audiobook. The work Gary has done on it so far has been incredible, and I'm just so thrilled to finally be able to share it with everybody.
Is that releasing in June? Is that what I read?
Releasing in June, yes. So soon after this podcast episode comes out, if everything goes according to plan.
Are there specific platforms that it's releasing on, or is it like everywhere?
I will be releasing wide just because I want to maximize accessibility for everyone, because not everyone has an Audible subscription or can afford one. A lot of people are using Libro.fm because that way your audiobook subscription money goes towards keeping independent bookstores open, or they're listening through the Livy or the Hoopla app for their local library. So releasing wide will get everyone the access they need.
Do you often visit specialty retailers like independent bookshops?
I love independent bookshops. That's where all the good books are.
What's the landscape of that look like? How does that differ from the Barnes and Noble?
Do you mean as a consumer or as the author? Does he do events? Is that what you're asking?
I was thinking my business hat was on. So I guess as an author, what are the biggest challenges for last mile of delivery, right? And then are you noticing that? Because there's a different feeling when you walk into a small independent specialty retailer. Every time I go to a specialty retailer, I always look for the one thing that they do better.
I mean, I find they're definitely more passionate about it because they're usually more invested in acquiring their stock personally. So the books they tend to stock will be, the big names that keep the bookstore open, but then they will usually specialize in books that either they or their employees or their loyal customer base have asked to put in the shop. There's also a strong historical connection between the queer community and bookstores, because for a long, long time before Barnes and Noble kind of flattened that market out, there were a lot of specifically queer bookstores that became kind of community centers for queer folks.
Ooh, okay.
In a way, you could get more information on yourself and your community, especially pre-internet, because if you're the only queer kid in your family, your grandparents, your parents, your cousins, your siblings, they won't necessarily know what to do with you. And if you want to find the history of your community, you're going to have to kind of go out and find it for yourself. And queer bookstores were a cool, safe place to do that.
Okay. It's like a quest.
A bit, yeah.
Do you sorry, do you have now, as the author yourself, do you have to go in and sell into these specialty retailers on your own?
Yeah, it's a lot of, especially locally, approaching local independent bookstores, because a lot of them, they want to bring in the local community, and they also want to stock books that people want to buy, so they like to do local author events specifically. So it's a lot of going to them and be like, okay, how many miles radius is local to you personally? And also, do you want to stock queer books specifically? And again, because of that strong connection between the queer community and independent bookstores, usually the answer is yes, which is very fortunate for me. But yeah, it's a lot of going out in person and building community connections.
Yeah, I think you find the best books at independent bookstores. You get the best recommendations, books that aren't on every other list and aren't what everyone else is talking about, and you just find the coolest books. I love it.
Absolutely, yeah. 100% agreed.
What's one piece of advice you'd like to pass along to others?
Other people in general, or other authors or readers?
Your choice.
Okay. I guess this could be applicable to everybody if you take it on a more general creative level, but I would say write the weird thing that you're scared no one else likes. Because there were so many little details in O King, Holly King that I almost didn't include because I was afraid they were too much or too strange. But, like, those are the things that make a story unique and worth telling, because otherwise you're just churning out the same schlock as everyone else. And at that point, why would I pick your book specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect Oak King, Holly King to develop a murder mystery arc in the later half of the book.
Yeah.
Surprise! Uh-oh, he's dead.
Like,
Check
so
again.
dead, there's no body. What?
And frankly, even if there was a body, they didn't really have a police force at that point in history. Like,
Right.
there wasn't a whole lot they could do.
There's no forensics.
Forensics was still very, very baby science.
That's the sweet spot of crime. You know, initially, like you had like Cain and Abel, and like, oh, one of them didn't come home, the other one messed up bigly. You know, and then you get
there are only 4 people alive on the planet who could have done it.
Yeah, exactly. Right? What a. And then, like, today, like, you got all this forensics and everything's documented everywhere. But, like, then you're right. It wasn't like, that's the time I should have lived. Can you imagine all that I've gotten away with?
Yes.
If I can recommend a fascinating nonfiction look at this phenomenon throughout history, I would recommend The Invention of Murder by Judith Flanders, because she goes through the whole 19th century and kind of documents the culture surrounding the birth of modern crime fighting, I guess.
Ooh.
Just like as the police force was being built and as technology was being developed and as like even cultural attitudes towards murder as a concept shifted in response. It's a very cool book. I highly recommend.
Was murder like in at some point? Like, is that, and then like the society was like, wait a minute.
It's less that murder was in and more like what really counts as murder and what's just a weird accident that we're not going to look into too hard.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
No, you don't.
What do you mean?
No.
It was easy back then. You just said, oh man, one of those 4 humors was out of alignment. That's what got him.
Right.
We here at Of Swords and Soulmates do not condone murder. Murder bad, actually.
Wait a minute.
Thank you for having our backs. So we have listened to your other podcasts, so we know that you do a ton of research reading, but when you're not doing your research reading for your writing, are there any favorite books or anything you'd recommend, other than one you already have?
I really enjoyed Swords Point by Ellen Kushner. It is, at the risk of spoiling it, my peak example of a satisfying happy for now ending.
Ooh,
for a queer romantasy. And she was kind of really ahead of the curve there because this book came out in the mid to late 80s, I want to say. And it's also very impressive, just the sheer amount of world building by implication that she packs into a very slender volume. It's a very short book, but like action-packed, real page-turner.
Is there anything else anybody else would like to ask before we wrap it up?
Let me check my notes. And I go to my word wall. Oh, do you have any like upcoming projects? Like anything, like any irons in the fire? Besides, like, we know the audiobook that's coming out. I'm gonna get to devour that with my ear holes. But like anything like super excited about like coming out soon?
I do have my ongoing drawer-fic serial fiction on my Patreon at patreon.com/Sebastian Nothwell, where now I've just finished doing the solar fantasy retelling of Mr. Warren's Profession, and I've moved on to the now in progress Victorian vampire 3-way, as of yet untitled. And I'm also still coming out with new episodes of Right Here, Right Queer with the rest of our panel of hosts. So a bunch of queer, cozy fantasy authors on topics relevant to readers and writers alike.
What's queer? This is late in the game. What's queer cozy? Don't look at me like that, Ashley.
Two separate words.
What's that?
Two separate words. And
sorry, there was a comma there, but I did go through it very fast.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay, I gotcha.
Although maybe you just invented a genre. I'm just saying.
You could. I mean, that could be a thing. I don't even.
There was a very funny Reddit post recently where someone asked, I've noticed that when I look for cozy fantasy novels, there aren't a lot of straight people. Is being queer part of the genre requirements? And it's just like, no. Queer people just tend to really like this kind of story in particular. It's just, it's happenstance.
Other than your Patreon, is there anywhere else people can find you, or do you want people to reach out to you at?
They can find all of my social media and updates on new and ongoing projects at my website, sebastiannothwell.com.
Anything else anybody wants to add before we are done?
What's your antique podcast, too? I feel like if I'm going to listen to it, I better figure out what...
It is Antiques Freaks.
Oh, that's such a good name, too.
We like
Dang.
We are the only explicit rated antiques podcast.
Get the...
Do you wish the appraisers on Antiques Roadshow could cuss? Check out Antiques Freaks.
That's amazing.
I love it.
We've all wished that Antiques Roadshow would have Samuel L. Jackson as one of its presenters for an episode. I think it would have boosted their ratings for sure. So I could just see it, Samuel L. Jackson yelling at the camera, "Say Baroque again!"
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you so much,
We're good to
Sebastian.
go.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you
was a
so
great
much.
time. Thank you so much for spending it with us.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sebastian. I appreciate your
Thank
time.
you for inviting me on. This is a blast.